This is fine. I'm okay with the events that are unfolding currently. That's okay. Things are gonna be okay.
Disney are an empire in decline. With several of the entertainment industry's largest IPs at their disposal, they have at times dominated the film industry, whether it was their incredible animation feats from Snow White to Toy Story, their own IPs or IPs they've acquired. Disney have been at the top for a long time, creating quality and also questionable content that has them essentially dictating the film industry's direction. Whether it's the MCU, Star Wars, Pixar, streaming services, even their theme parks, they seemingly have their finger in just about every pie, and in the process became a juggernaut of entertainment. Well, that's kind of how it used to be, and as you've seen the title of this video, it's not exactly going to come as a shock that I'm not here to praise Disney's rise to the top. Because in the last decade, the last 5 years or so specifically, Disney have fallen off to a degree that now in 2023 has them admitting publicly their struggles. But what's worse on their part is that this is something fans saw coming a mile away, yet Disney in their own stubborn ways chose not to listen, and are now facing the consequences. If you take a look at just about every single thing Disney owns in the entertainment space, you'll notice a decline. The MCU isn't what it used to be. Star Wars has somehow become completely dead. Indiana Jones just became one of the biggest box office flops in history. New Pixar releases are having historically low openings. Disney Plus is arguably the worst streaming service. And then throw on top of that their preference to engage in out-of-place social commentary instead of telling a good story, souring fans across the board. And even their theme park numbers are on the decline. I could go on. And obviously, given that I'm doing this video, I'm gonna do that. I've been working away at this video for a few months now, just doing little bits and pieces here and there, and I thought at some point I'd have to eat my own words and scrap the video as things might have got back on track. But it's kind of been the opposite. Things have just gotten worse, and it doesn't look like it's getting any better anytime soon. So this is why Disney is falling apart. So as stated earlier, to say Disney are on a decline would be an understatement, and it doesn't bring me pleasure to say that, as I'm sure all of us at some point have been endlessly entertained by Disney related products, more so when we were younger, but Disney have always had something there for the big kids as well. But the proof of Disney's decline, it's in the pudding. Disney's top 17 highest grossing films of all time came out between 2010 and 2019. Now, this would signal strength at the box office for Disney, and sure it does, but it also highlights how quickly things have dropped off. Since 2019, it's been pretty much all red, with flop after flop after flop, with mild successes occasionally. Now, yes, you can attribute that to the pandemic, but as Top Gun Maverick, Super Mario, and even recently Barbie have proven, films can still clean up at the box office post-pandemic, which is exactly what Disney used to do. In a post-pandemic world, viewers aren't going to just come out in droves for bad movies like they did pre-pandemic. You need to earn the moviegoer's ticket way more than you used to. Now, does this mean bad films aren't still successful in some ways? Absolutely not. But again, you need to earn the moviegoer's ticket way more today than you used to. Like The Rise of Skywalker made $1 billion for Christ's sake.
Somehow Palpatine returned.
And this very logic is completely exposing Disney. The MCU's financial returns, which has been their biggest juggernaut for quite some time, whilst not completely terrible, have declined. Star Wars hasn't had a box office presence for nearly 5 years, but don't worry, we'll get to Star Wars later. And then there's their latest Pixar films. They haven't had a massive hit worthy of the name for nearly 5 years, and Indiana Jones 5 is somehow going to lose money. And to top it off, their parks are on the decline as well. Disney's downward trend simply cannot be disputed, although I'm sure many will try. But this isn't even taking into account that Disney Plus is pretty much losing money, and their exclusive series are being watched by fewer and fewer people as time goes by. It really is not a happy time over at the Mouse House, but let's put the magnifying glass on the specifics that are on the decline under Disney. The first being one of the biggest. Star Wars. Remember that name when it meant something? Star Wars has catapulted to the realms of complete irrelevance in the past few years. Now, if you don't believe me, let's just take a look at Google Trends. Star Wars is currently less relevant than it was in 2007. Yes, you heard that correct. Star Wars was more relevant in the mid to late 2000s when there was nothing happening for the brand, and it was essentially sitting in post-prequel purgatory. It's actually impressive how Disney have driven this IP into the ground. Basically to the point that people just don't care about it anymore. The Star Wars name is not what it once was, whether you like it or not. I remember 5 years ago seeing videos and articles being posted that Disney had ruined Star Wars, Disney had killed Star Wars, and I used to just sit there and laugh at it, as it's such a ridiculous claim. Because Star Wars can't die, it's just too big to fail. It's one of the biggest entertainment IPs in the history of the human race. But 5 years later, in 2023, they genuinely have killed this IP. Star Wars is less relevant today with shows like The Mandalorian just finishing its 3rd season and Ahsoka on the horizon than it was when there was literally nothing happening for this IP. At best, a couple video games and some comics, yet it was still more relevant in that time than under Disney's control in 2023 with $100+ million shows hitting our screens. Star Wars was just at its peak around The Force Awakens and The Last Jedi, in a relevant sense anyway. Star Wars was back, people were excited, fan theories were everywhere, and the money was coming in left, right, and center. And before The Last Jedi had even come out, Disney had pretty much already made back the $4 billion the IP cost them in the first place. But in that time period, something changed, and The Last Jedi was basically the catalyst for that change. Now, yes, I understand The Last Jedi has its admirers, but this was the time where the decline of Star Wars happened under Disney. There's simply no disputing it. It made $1.4 billion at the box office, sure, but it derailed a promising trilogy in that process and is responsible for the abomination that was The Rise of Skywalker, leading Disney to go on a Star Wars movie hiatus and rely solely on streaming to keep the IP in the zeitgeist. The Mandalorian was a big win for Disney in its first 2 seasons, but like everything under Disney seemingly, 2023 pretty much solidified that the magic was now gone, with season 3 of The Mandalorian being honestly just terrible. Not even bringing back Obi-Wan Kenobi and Darth Vader was enough to save Star Wars. If anything, it actually turned people away, as they gave the directing job to someone clearly not suited to the role. They didn't allocate the budget the show needed, and they hired a writer that openly admitted to having limited Star Wars knowledge. Not to mention they shoved characters down our throat that were poorly written and integrated into the story. Like, remember, they actually had to kill the Grand Inquisitor in Kenobi to justify why Reva was in the show, despite the fact we all know the Grand Inquisitor can't die in Kenobi because we've seen him die in Star Wars Rebels already. Yeah, that's the levels of stupidity we went to with Kenobi. Ewan McGregor and Hayden Christensen deserved so much better. Now, on the flip side of that coin, Andor was actually really good, but again, the problem is nobody watched it. When something good actually comes out, but nobody watches it, that's a problem. The only real area in which Star Wars is actually seeing any success today is with the video games, specifically with Jedi Fallen Order and Jedi Survivor. And if you've played the 2 games, I mean, you know exactly why. They're the 2 best things to come out under Disney's Star Wars reign, according to a lot of people, and I kind of share that sentiment. Reason being, they tell interesting stories, they have interesting characters, and if it wasn't for these 2 games and the stories they tell, personally, I think I'd be done with this IP entirely. Cal Kestis is one of the best, if not the best, characters Disney have introduced. And as for the female characters, as that's obviously a very hot talking point in Star Wars, if you want good ones, there's 3 excellent ones in these games, with Trilla Sidori, Sia Junda, and Merrin. So if you want to see Reva from Obi-Wan Kenobi, but actually done right, go and play Jedi Fallen Order. The second sister is that character done right. I don't know why the writers of these 2 games can do literally everything better than any of the writers on Star Wars films and shows. Full credit to them. Those 2 games for me are literally holding Star Wars together. But perhaps the most baffling thing Disney have done with Star Wars is, amidst all the controversy, amidst all the fan displeasure with the IP's direction, what did Kathleen Kennedy decide to go and do to save Star Wars? She announced a Rey movie.
Fuck off.
They are literally determined to destroy this IP once and for all. Like, we're doomed. I cannot stress how much pressure is on the shoulders of the Ahsoka series. Now look, we've just come off the back of perhaps Marvel's lowest point with Secret Invasion. The MCU has been on a downward trend since Endgame, which isn't exactly a hot take at this point, and I've spoken at length on this channel about the MCU's downfall, and I don't think we really need anything further than the cliff notes to know why at this point. As the MCU is the biggest film franchise in the world, it dethroned Star Wars years ago for the reasons we just spoke about. But since Endgame, the MCU has been an absolute mess of oversaturation, brain-dead storytelling, botching good premises, out-of-touch social commentary that a 5-year-old seemingly wrote, dumbing down formerly complex characters because male character equals dumb in the current Hollywood writing meta, as well as just not managing to recapture what made the road to Infinity War and Endgame so great in the first place. The absence of Tony Stark and Steve Rogers is something that the MCU simply has just not been able to fix, and 4 years on since Endgame, they are no closer to finding a replacement to create a centerpoint for this franchise. And as a result, the MCU slate just feels like a studio puking out whatever comes across their desk because they can. The best thing to come out of the MCU since Endgame was Guardians of the Galaxy 3, and conveniently, it had nothing to do with the MCU. It took place in space and had essentially none of the Earth-based characters and was purely its own little pocket adventure. And I don't think it's a coincidence that it's the best thing the MCU has done in recent years, given that very reason. The MCU is the major juggernaut under Disney's umbrella, as like I said, they've already killed Star Wars for a lot of people, but the MCU doesn't seem to be crawling out of its lull period anytime soon. As stated, they just hit their lowest point with the Secret Invasion finale that nobody watched anyway, and around the corner we have Loki, which to be honest, I'll probably check out because I didn't hate the first season. But then there's Echo, which will feature a show centered around Maya Lopez.
Who?
Yeah, exactly. They're apparently dumping the entire season at once on Disney Plus, which essentially says, yeah, we know this show sucks and nobody's gonna watch it, so if they have no faith in it, why should we? And then 2023 is probably going to cap off with the Marvels, and yeah, I'm sure we all can't wait for that. Current MCU and future MCU, it's looking pretty dire. It doesn't help that the actor playing the new big bad in Kang is seemingly in and out of courtrooms every 5 minutes, just piling on the disaster that the MCU has unraveled into in recent years. It's one of Disney's golden goose eggs, arguably its biggest, but it's developing into a real pain in the ass more than anything. So Pixar and Walt Disney Animation makes up for a large chunk of what made Disney successful in the first place. Doesn't matter who you are or where you've come from, you've seen and loved many of these classics over the years. And to be fair, the Pixar section of Disney's problems are far from the biggest. Lightyear in 2022 barely made its money back, raking in $226 million on a $200 million budget. So after marketing, it was probably a loss for Pixar, which is not what you come to expect. And Elementals, which just released and seemingly nobody talks about, had the worst opening in Pixar's 29-year history. Luckily, it found some legs since then and has managed to surpass Lightyear. But this is a far cry from the success of Toy Story, Incredibles, Inside Out. And as for Walt Disney Animation Studios, which over the years have been responsible for most of the animation classics that we love, their most recent entry, Strange World, was one of the biggest box office flops ever, falling $100 million short of its budget at the box office, which is a major L. So the animation side of Disney, they're not exactly flying with passing colors these days, but having said that, are by no means in as dire of a situation as something like Star Wars. Now, this is the part of the video that is probably going to get people talking, as politics, the culture war, it's seemingly what drives any form of discussion on the internet in 2023, and naturally has filtered into the entertainment space, and is without question one of the biggest reasons for Disney's decline. The problem Disney are faced with is they're not pissing off just one side by being overly progressive to the point of delusion, but they're pissing off both sides. They're trying to have their cake and eat it too, trying to appear progressive, inclusive, fair, but at the same time their existence and actual ethics contradict the very messages they push in their product. They've got a CEO that would rather fund his billion-dollar estates than actually pay his workers a fair wage because it's not realistic. Like, what a stand-up guy. Disney's obsession with being politically correct or woke, whatever trigger word you want, has absolutely gone too far. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm going to make it clear, equality is good. Strong female characters, when done right, are great. Inclusivity is great. All of it, it's great. The problem is sacrificing story and character and common sense in order to get there is not. That's the problem, and that's what Disney seemingly don't understand, and that's why a large portion of cinema goers are sick of Disney's obsession with being overly PC to the point of sheer delusion. It's not because they're misogynistic or racist. Anybody who actually is those things needs to go play in traffic. People just want good stories with good characters, and they're not getting that. That's the bottom line. Modern, strong female characters under Disney are such a far cry from the strong, badass female characters of years past, such as Ripley or Sarah Connor, just to name a few. In order to make a female character strong in Disney's eyes is to have the character so inherently unbelievable, condescending, and unlikable that it just begs the question on what point they're even trying to prove. And when fans revolt, Disney slap a misogynistic label on them, but it's like, no, your character just sucks. Now, this doesn't go for every female character under Disney's reign. Wanda in the MCU and Ahsoka in Star Wars, two badass female characters that I've got a lot of time for because they're actually good characters. I know, it's mind-blowing. People like good characters. Take note, Disney, because you're the only ones that fail to see that. Now, we could get into all the gender swapping and the race swapping of beloved characters all day, but to be honest, that's the kind of stuff that I can actually get past if the character is actually good. Again, the bottom line, if the character's good, there's no basis for argument. If it's not a swap just for swap's sake and is stripping every essence of what made the character loved in the first place, then there shouldn't be a problem. But Disney's most recent controversy has come in the form of Snow White and the Seven Dwarves. Sorry, Snow White and the Seven people of various skin colors and genders, because dwarves aren't allowed to have roles anymore. Like, do you see the contradiction in Disney's broken ideology of what it means to be progressive? The Seven Dwarves in the Snow White remake are no longer dwarves because that's not politically correct, apparently. So by that logic, it means that in order to be politically correct, you have to discriminate. Like, do you see the contradiction here? Like, it's absolutely mind-blowing to me. Granted, this isn't just a Disney thing. Hugh Grant is an Oompa Loompa now, taking away another role from a dwarf actor. Hollywood, you're doing a bang-up job on the whole progressive thing. Really practicing what you preach. It's things like this that turn film goers off. The average film goer just wants to watch a good movie, have a good time, and be entertained, but how is that supposed to happen when shit like this is so prevalent in every project? The sheer hypocrisy from Disney when it comes to this stuff plays a large role in why their numbers are on the decline. Again, they manage to piss off both sides because nothing makes sense. It's all layered in hypocrisy. Disney simply think that they are too big to fail, and that hubris is costing them beyond belief. Now, when it comes to remakes, Disney are not exactly trailblazers on this front. Remakes and requels pretty much run Hollywood. But Disney's shameless capitalization on their popular animated films are one of the worst examples of greed that they have ever displayed. These live-action remakes make a shit ton of money, but that gravy train has slowed down as there is a rotten stigma surrounding those live-action remakes. Because pretty much all of them have been terrible or just at best mid. The remake started off with big money makers like Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, The Lion King, all of which crossed $1 billion and were essentially the same film as the animation, just devoid of anything that made the original so good. The problem for Disney is these blatant, unimaginative cash grabs aren't working anymore. Despite the originals being great, Pinocchio and Mulan's remakes were absolutely awful and flopped miserably. And then in 2023, we got Peter Pan and Wendy, which I couldn't even get through, and The Little Mermaid, which did make some money at the box office, but was a far cry from the massive success these remakes were seeing pre-pandemic. And from the look of things, it seems like this trend is only going to continue with more soulless remakes on the way. Snow White and the Seven Dwarves, 7 people of various height, color, and gender, is set for 2024 and is a shitstorm in the making. Then there's going to be Moana, Robin Hood, Lilo and Stitch, and many more, all primed to be soulless cash grabs like the rest, and if the trend is to continue, they're probably going to fail. But the final shit show in Disney's crown is Disney+, arguably the worst of the streaming platforms and almost the direct reason why the MCU and Star Wars have fallen off a cliff. Disney have this absolutely abysmal formula with their streaming platform that I don't think anybody thinks is a good thing. Series with very few episodes and then small runtimes in those episodes. Some of them coming out with less than 30-minute episodes for a $100+ million series. The mantra of Disney Plus is less about telling good stories and more about creating content as quickly and efficiently as possible. That's what Disney Plus feels like. It feels like a content machine as opposed to something you actually want to tune into. Don't get me wrong, Disney Plus has had some wins. Mandalorian, Andor, they spring to mind. But the losses far outweigh the wins here. Disney Plus has ruined two of Disney's biggest IPs through this streaming service, and it's done it in such a short time frame. It is a large contributor to the oversaturation of the MCU. It's too hard to keep up with, and the fact that Star Wars, a franchise that made it on the big screen, is limited to Disney Plus, or at least has been since 2019, and will be for another 2 years, has led to its decline as well. The Mandalorian was a huge deal when it first came out, but like everything under Disney, somehow they just managed to take it too far and turn it into an absolute joke. And I mean, like I said, the MCU Secret Invasion just sent the MCU to its lowest point yet with its finale. Nobody watched it, and whatever this is happened. Like, Disney Plus was a necessary evil for Disney to tap into, considering the streaming trend with other services. But this necessary evil has pumped the brakes on one of their most successful IPs in the MCU and effectively killed their former most successful IP in Star Wars. The MCU and Star Wars on Disney Plus have so much riding on Loki and Ahsoka. Loki needs to be a hit considering how awful Secret Invasion's numbers were. And Ahsoka needs to be a hit for Star Wars, otherwise that franchise is truly going to be dead. I really hope that's not the case. I'm really rooting for the Ahsoka show. But that show is honestly the last hope for Star Wars until the Rey movie comes out and, you know, saves everything. I still can't believe they thought that that was going to be the answer to their problems, man. Like, Disney Plus is just, it's bad for Disney and it's bad for viewers. So to bring this one all home, Disney, they're an empire in decline and they only have themselves to blame. They blame the audience, but the audience is the one that keeps making it clear why things aren't working and what needs to change. But Disney's broken mentality of we're too big to fail is costing them something chronic. Numbers are down across the board for their films, their shows, the box office, their theme parks, you name it, and you can only blame so much on inflation and the pressure that that's putting on people. But people are just not content with Disney's shit anymore, and I think it's a great thing that this has happened because it's going to force Disney to rethink how they operate. I think entertainment in general is a better place when Disney are firing on all cylinders. They've provided endless entertainment for lifetimes, but it's time for change, or the biggest entertainment empire is going to continue to crumble.